My son, the cardiologist, looked at the prescription from his own colleague and slid it across the polished marble of his kitchen island. "Mom," he said calmly, his voice the same one he uses to deliver bad news to strangers. "The money for this medication could go toward my children's education." I didn't say a word. I just looked down at his hands, manicured, steady surgeon's hands, resting beside the piece of paper. Hands that became what they are, because my hands, for 20 years, were plunged in flour up to the elbows. He didn't notice my silence. His attention had drifted to the new watch on his wrist, a heavy band of gold and steel. He turned his wrist slightly, admiring the way the light caught the dial. The next morning, after he left for the hospital, after the sound of his expensive car faded down the long, paved driveway, I made a phone call, not to my pharmacy, not to another doctor. I called my lawyer. You see, that single moment in his kitchen wasn't an argument. It was an audit. It was the final entry in a ledger I had been keeping in my heart for 2 decades. After he said those words, after he dismissed my health as a competing financial interest, something inside me went perfectly, chillingly still. The soft, blurry love of a mother snapped into the sharp focus of an investor reviewing a portfolio that had just catastrophically failed. I stayed for dinner that evening. I had to. Leaving abruptly would have been emotional, and I was long past emotion. I was in the information gathering phase. I sat on his stiff designer sofa, the kind that looks better than it feels, and I just watched. I became an anthropologist studying a strange, cold tribe that I had once mistaken for my family. He took a phone call in the dining room, pacing back and forth. I heard snippets of it. Yes, the chalet in Aspen sounds perfect for February. No, price isn't an object, just book it. He was talking about a ski vacation. A vacation that would cost 10, maybe 20 times what that 1-month supply of medication on the table cost. I made a mental note of it. Exhibit A, discretionary spending. Later, his wife, Catherine, came and sat beside me, her smile as bright and hard as the diamonds in her ears. She had a glossy brochure in her hands. "Agnes," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sweetness. "Look at this. This is the new academy we're thinking of for little Chloe. Their equestrian program is world-class." She opened it to a page showing smiling children in riding helmets, patting the noses of sleek, beautiful horses. I saw the tuition figures at the bottom of the page. It was more than the entire annual profit of my bakery in its best year. The bakery I had sold. The one whose ashes had paid for the hands of the man now planning a ski trip. I just nodded, my face a polite neutral mask. Exhibit B, non-essential luxuries. Catherine, emboldened by my silence, decided to offer her own piece of wisdom. She patted my hand, her touch cool and brief. "We all have to make sacrifices, Agnes," she said, her eyes glancing meaningfully at the prescription still sitting on the kitchen island. "David works so hard. We have to be practical about these things. A sacrifice," she was telling me. The woman who had sacrificed her life's work about sacrifice. It was so perfectly, breathtakingly absurd that I almost felt a smile touch my lips. It was like a child with a fistful of stolen cookies lecturing a starving man on the virtues of fasting. I just looked at her, and in my mind, I filed her testimony away. Exhibit C, active complicity. I watched my son with his children. He was a good father, in the modern way. He helped them with their homework on their sleek little laptops. He praised their drawings. He was patient. But there was a transactional quality to it all. It felt like he was managing them, nurturing his assets, ensuring his legacy. He wasn't just raising children. He was curating the next generation of success. And I, it was now clear, was a line item on the wrong side of that legacy's balance sheet. An old debt he felt had been paid in full. That night, I lay awake in the immaculate guest room of his enormous, silent house. The sheets were a ridiculously high thread count, softer than anything I had ever owned, but they felt like ice. I wasn't crying. Crying is for mothers whose hearts are broken. My heart wasn't broken. It was liquidated. It had been converted into something else. A cold, hard currency of resolve. I thought about my hands. For 25 years, those hands had been my life. Waking up at 4 a.m., the chill of the unheated bakery in my bones. The feel of the dough coming to life under my palms, the burns on my forearms from the deep ovens, the ache in my back that was my constant companion. I remembered the day David got his acceptance letter to medical school. The joy, so pure and bright it felt like the sun had risen right there in our tiny kitchen. And then, the crushing reality of the cost, $250,000. It might as well have been $1 billion. I remembered meeting with Mr. Langley, my lawyer, a kind man with sad eyes who had helped me buy the bakery years before. I told him I was selling. He tried to talk me out of it. "Agnes," he'd said, "this is your life, your security." I just shook my head. "No," I told him, "this is his." I signed the papers. I handed over the keys. The new owners turned it into a trendy cupcake shop. I never went back. The entire sum, every last penny, went into an account for David's education. It covered everything. His tuition, his books, his rent, his food. He never had to work a single part-time job. He never had to take out a student loan. He graduated debt-free, top of his class, with those perfect, rested hands ready to save lives. He was my masterpiece, my one great, magnificent investment. And now, 20 years later, the CEO of the company I had founded with my own body and soul was looking at his expensive watch and telling me my maintenance costs were too high. Lying there in the dark, I felt the last flicker of a mother's sentimental love go out. It wasn't a dramatic event. It was quiet, like a pilot light extinguishing. And in its place, a different kind of mind took over. The mind of the woman who had run a business single-handedly for 25 years. The mind that knew the value of every dollar, every ounce of flour, every minute of lost sleep. The mind of the founder who was about to be pushed out of her own company. The prescription lay on the table downstairs. A small piece of paper, a catalyst. It was a bill that he had refused to pay. And it made me realize that the original invoice, the one for $250,000, was still outstanding. An investment had been made, a moral contract had been signed, and it had been breached. I closed my eyes, and a thought, as clear and sharp as a shard of glass, formed in my mind. All right, if I am a burden, then this burden has a price. Let's see if he can afford to pay it. The next morning, I was the first one up. I made coffee, just like I always did when I stayed over. He came down, dressed in his crisp, expensive suit, smelling of cologne. He smiled at me, a brief, dismissive smile. "Morning, Mom." He had already forgotten yesterday's conversation. To him, it was a minor financial issue that had been efficiently resolved. He had no idea he had just declared bankruptcy. A moral bankruptcy from which there was no recovery. I waited. I watched him check his phone, kiss his children, and walk out the door. The sound of his engine was the starting gun. I picked up my purse, walked to the guest room phone, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Mr. Langley's office," a polite voice answered. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Please tell him Agnes is calling. It's about an old investment. I need to schedule an appointment to discuss the terms of my withdrawal." Walking into Mr. Langley's office was like stepping back in time. the same sad eyes, the same scent of old paper and stale coffee. But I was not the same woman who had sat in that chair 20 years ago, a hopeful, terrified mother signing away her life's work. This time, I walked in as a creditor. I had spent the day before our meeting in my attic, a place I hadn't visited in years. The air was thick with the dust of dormant memories. I wasn't looking for sentimental objects. I was looking for paperwork. In a heavy metal lockbox, I found it, a folder brittle with age. Inside was the original bill of sale for the bakery, the closing statements, and, most importantly, the bank slips. A neat, chronological stack of transfer receipts to an account under the name of David Miller. Proof. Tangible, undeniable proof of the investment. I laid the folder on Mr. Langley's polished desk. He opened it, his long, careful fingers handling the old papers with a reverence they deserved. He read in silence for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I remember this day, Agnes," he said finally, looking up at me over his spectacles. "I told you it was a mistake." "You were right," I said. "And you were wrong. It wasn't a mistake to invest in his future. It was a mistake to assume the investment would yield a human return." He nodded slowly, understanding perfectly. "What do you want to do, Agnes? Emotionally, I know what you must want, but legally, a gift is a gift. Proving this was a loan after 20 years will be nearly impossible." "I know," I said, and my voice was calm, devoid of any pleading. This was the moment I had rehearsed in my head 100 times. "I am not here for an emotional victory, Robert. I'm a businesswoman, and in business there are many ways to frame a transaction. I want you to draft a letter, not a threat, a proposal. Frame it as a moral obligation that we now wish to formalize." I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. "We will calculate the original sum $250,000. We will not add interest. That can be my final gift to him. We will present it not as a demand, but as a family loan that has now been called due. We will state that I am planning for my future medical needs and require the return of my capital. We will give him 30 days to respond with a repayment plan. I don't want to punish him," I said, the words feeling precise and true. "I want to be repaid. My investment matured. Now, it's time to cash out." Mr. Langley stared at me for a moment, and then a slow, deep smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated professional admiration. "Agnes," he said, tapping a finger on the folder, "you've been calling this a sacrifice for 20 years. You've been calling it a gift. That's the wrong terminology. In my world, what you did was provide high-risk venture capital to a startup with a promising but unproven asset. The startup, Dr. David Miller, Incorporated, is now a resounding success. It's time to collect your dividends." His words were a balm. He didn't see a heartbroken mother. He saw a savvy investor. He saw me for who I had been and who I was becoming again. That meeting was my first step in reclaiming my identity. The second step was for me alone. The day after my meeting with Mr. Langley, I went to my bank. I sat down with a manager and opened a new account, under my name only. A future health and independence fund, I called it. I systematically transferred every penny of my modest savings into it. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. It was the act of drawing a bold, clear line. I would be my own safety net from now on. The quiet satisfaction of signing that paperwork, of creating my own small fortress of financial security, was immense. It was the feeling of taking back control. The final step happened that evening. Energized, I went back up to the attic. This time, I wasn't looking for papers. I pushed past old furniture and forgotten boxes until I found it, leaning against the far wall, covered in a dusty sheet. I pulled the sheet away, and the smell of old paint and wood filled the air. It was the sign from my bakery, hand-carved from a thick piece of oak, with raised, painted letters, Agnes's Good Things. My husband had made it for me the week we opened. Beneath it, in smaller letters, it said bread, pastry, a little bit of happiness. I ran my hand over the dusty, familiar letters. I had taken it down the day we sold, unable to bear the thought of it hanging over a stranger's door. I had hidden it away, along with the woman who had dreamed it into existence. I also found a heavy wooden box next to it, my recipe box. I opened it. Inside were hundreds of index cards, all covered in my handwriting, stained with vanilla, butter, and thyme. The precise, scientific formulas for creating comfort and joy. The smell of cinnamon and yeast seemed to rise from the dry paper. This was my medical degree. This was my life's work. I carried the heavy sign and the recipe box downstairs. It took me 3 trips. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I knew I couldn't leave them in the dark anymore. I polished the sign until the oak gleamed, and I propped it up against the wall in my living room. It was absurdly large for the space, a relic from another world. But seeing it there, solid and real, made me feel grounded. It was a statement. This is who I am. Meanwhile, my son was living in blissful ignorance. I knew his mind. He had already justified his decision. He'd categorized it as a tough but responsible financial choice for his family's future. He probably felt righteous. He had no idea that an audit was underway. He had no idea that a bill, 20 years overdue, was about to be delivered to his marble kitchen island. That night, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the old, familiar hum of purpose, the feeling I used to get at 4 a.m. when I walked into the dark, quiet bakery, the feeling of a day's work ahead, of ingredients waiting to be transformed, of a plan that needed to be executed with precision and care. The old documents on my lawyer's desk were more than just proof of a transaction. They were the original charter of the company my son had forgotten I had founded, and they were more powerful than blood. They were my leverage, my power, my move. The game had begun, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt like myself again. Mr. Langley worked quickly. 3 days after our meeting, a courier delivered a draft of the letter to my home. I read it over a cup of coffee at my kitchen table, the old bakery sign leaning against the wall like a silent wooden witness. It was a masterpiece of polite corporate ruthlessness. There were no accusations, no mention of hurtful words or expensive watches. It was dry, factual, and completely unassailable. It began, "Dear Dr. Miller," not "Dear David." It calmly referenced the significant financial outlay made by his mother, Agnes Miller, between the years of 1999 and 2003 for the exclusive purpose of funding his medical education. It detailed the total sum, $250,000. It then stated that due to personal financial planning and the need to secure her long-term health care, Miss Miller was now recalling this interest-free family loan. It concluded by politely requesting that he or his legal representative contact Mr. Langley's office within 30 business days to discuss a structured repayment plan. It was perfect. It was a document scrubbed clean of love, pain, and betrayal. It was just a number on a page. It was a language he would understand. I signed my approval, and the next morning, A certified letter was dispatched to my son's multi-million-dollar home. Then, I waited. I knew it would take a day for the letter to arrive. I spent that day in a state of strange, suspended calm. I tidied my house. I went for a long walk. I baked a simple loaf of bread, just for myself, needing to feel the familiar comfort of the dough in my hands. I was preparing for the inevitable storm. It broke the next afternoon at precisely 3:47 p.m. My phone, which had been resting quietly on the counter, suddenly shrieked to life. The screen lit up with his name. David! My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. The fear was real. A lifetime of maternal instinct screamed at me to answer, to soothe, to explain. But Agnes, the businesswoman, held her ground. I took a deep, steadying breath and stared at the screen, watching his name flash again and again until the call finally ended. Silence for about 30 seconds. Then, a text message, all caps. Mom, what is this? Call me. He didn't understand. He thought it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, something a quick phone call could fix. He still saw me as Mom, a soft, pliable creature he could manage. The phone rang again. This time, I pressed the red decline button. The ringing stopped abruptly. It was a small, satisfying click of defiance. A new text message immediately appeared. I just got a letter from a lawyer. Your lawyer. This is some kind of sick joke. Pick up the phone. His shock was palpable, even through the cold, digital words, the disbelief. He couldn't reconcile the woman who baked him cookies with the woman who had sent a legal demand for $250,000. He couldn't see that they were, and always had been, the same person. The calls and texts continued for the next hour, a frantic, escalating barrage. They shifted from confusion to anger, then to wounded accusation. After everything I've done for you, you're doing this to me? Is this about the prescription? I told you, we have to be practical. This is insane. You're trying to ruin me. You're trying to ruin my family, my children's future. That last one almost made me laugh. He was quoting my own words back at me, twisting them into a weapon. It was magnificent in its hypocrisy. I read each message and then calmly deleted it. I did not engage. I did not defend. I was a gray rock wall, and he was a wave, crashing against me and breaking into foam. I knew I had to send one, and only one, response. It had to be the final word. It had to be the key that locked the door. With steady fingers, I typed out a single, cold, and concise message. David, I have translated our relationship into the only language you seem to understand. Money. For all further questions, please contact Mr. Langley. He is managing this account now. I read it twice to make sure there was no trace of emotion, no room for interpretation. Then, I pressed send. The moment the message showed delivered, I went into his contact information. I scrolled down. I pressed block this caller. His name vanished from my recent calls list. The barrage stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. I won't lie. My hands were shaking. I had to sit down. It felt like I had just detonated a bridge, the one and only bridge that connected me to the life I had built. There was fear, a deep, primal fear of being truly alone. But underneath it, a powerful new feeling was rising up. Liberation. For 20 years, I had been Dr. David Miller's mother. My identity was a reflection of his success. My story was a footnote in his. At dinner parties, people would say, "You must be so proud," and I would nod and smile, and a part of me would shrink. Now, in the terrifying, exhilarating silence of my kitchen, I was just Agnes, founder of Agnes's Good Things. a woman who knew her own worth and had just issued an invoice to prove it. The next day, Mr. Langley called. His voice was laced with a dry amusement. "Well, Agnes," he said, "I've had a rather spirited conversation with your son." "I imagine you did," I said. "He threatened to sue me for harassment. He threatened to sue you for extortion. He called you several unflattering names. He was, as they say, apoplectic." "And what did you do, Robert?" I asked. "I calmly repeated the terms of the proposal," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I explained that this was a simple matter of a recalled loan. I used a lot of very boring legal language. It's remarkably effective at deflating theatrical anger. By the end of the call, he was mostly just sputtering. Mr. Langley had become my shield. He was the firewall between my new quiet life and my son's chaotic fury. He absorbed the emotion and responded with logic, a language David, for all his bluster, was forced to respect. The letter, resting in its envelope on David's marble island, had done its work. It had transformed a messy, painful family drama into a clean, straightforward business dispute. He couldn't manipulate me with guilt. He couldn't bully me with anger. He had to deal with the facts. And the facts, printed on Mr. Langley's official letter-headed paper, were all on my side. The rules of the game had changed. And for the first time, I was the one holding the rule book. David, predictably, could not accept the new reality. A week of silence on my end, punctuated by frantic, unanswered calls from him to Mr. Langley's office, finally led to the inevitable. He demanded a meeting. Not a call, a face-to-face meeting. He probably thought his physical presence, the sheer force of his personality as a successful, important man, could intimidate me back into the role of his compliant mother. Mr. Langley relayed the request. "He wants to meet, here, with you. He says he will not discuss this matter further through lawyers." "Fine," I said without a moment's hesitation. "Set it for Friday at 10. This was not a concession. It was the final move in my campaign. A letter could be ignored, a lawyer could be argued with, but my presence, armed with his own cold logic, would be the checkmate. I arrived at the office 5 minutes early. I wore a simple, dark blue dress, the kind of thing a woman might wear to a business meeting. I carried a leather portfolio. Inside were copies of all the documents. Not that I would need them. They were a prop, a symbol of the new terms of our engagement. I was sitting opposite Mr. Langley at the large conference table when David was shown in. He looked terrible. He was impeccably dressed, as always, but his face was drawn and pale, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and desperation. He strode in, his expensive leather briefcase slapping against the table as he dropped it. He ignored Mr. Langley completely and fixed his eyes on me. "Mother," he began, his voice tight with suppressed fury, "I want you to tell me what this island. I want you to look me in the eye and explain this betrayal." He was trying to frame it as a family drama, a soap opera of hurt feelings. He wanted me to get emotional, to cry, to yell. He wanted a fight he knew how to win. I did not give it to him. I didn't look up from the folder in front of me. I opened it, smoothed a piece of paper, and then finally raised my eyes to meet his. My gaze was level, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. "David, let's not," I said. "Let's not talk about betrayal. You were the one who established the rules of our new relationship. You did that in your kitchen, when you calculated that my life was worth less than your children's future education. I've simply accepted the terms you laid out. This isn't a family conversation. This is a meeting to discuss a debt." The word debt hit him like a physical blow. It was a business word, a sterile, ugly word that stripped away all his emotional leverage. He recoiled slightly, taking a half step back. "Debt," he stammered, his voice rising. "This is not a debt. This is my family. This is my mother trying to destroy me over a misunderstanding." He tried to regain control, puffing up his chest. "I have given you everything. A comfortable life, a place in my home." I cut him off, not by raising my voice, but by lowering it. "No," I said, "you have not given me everything. You have, over the years, offered me lodging in exchange for child care and housekeeping services, the market value of which we can also calculate, if you'd like. The comfortable life you speak of was built on a foundation that I provided. A foundation of $250,000, which, if we were to factor in 20 years of compound interest, would be worth well over $500,000 today. I am waiving the interest. You should consider that a gift." He was speechless. His face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. He was a master of his own world, the hospital, where his word was law. But here, in this room, his authority meant nothing. He was just a man who owed a lot of money. He tried a different tactic, manipulation. His face crumpled into a mask of sorrow. "Mom, how can you be so cold? I'm your son. I love you." This was his last, most pathetic weapon. I met his gaze and held it. There was no flicker of warmth in my own. "You have a very strange, cost-benefit way of showing love, David," I said. "Which brings me to another point. Your colleague, Dr. Evans, prescribed that medication for me. I saw him for a follow-up last week. He's a nice man. He speaks very highly of you. Says you're one of the most principled cardiologists he knows." I let that hang in the air for a moment. I watched his eyes widen in panic. "I wonder," I continued, my voice still perfectly even, "what a man like Dr. Evans would think if he knew that his esteemed colleague had advised a patient, his own mother, no less to forego a prescribed treatment because the cost was inconvenient for his family's budget. It seems like the sort of ethical dilemma that might make for an interesting discussion at the next hospital board meeting, don't you think?" That was it. That was the kill shot. It had nothing to do with love or family or money. It was a direct threat to the one thing he truly valued: his reputation, his professional standing. The carefully constructed image of Dr. David Miller, the brilliant, principled lifesaver. He saw his entire world, the respect of his peers, the admiration of his community, teetering on the edge of a precipice. He understood, in that horrifying moment of clarity, that I had thought of everything. He sank into a chair, all the fight gone out of him. He looked, for the first time, like a small, defeated man. He just stared at the polished surface of the table. "What do you want?" he whispered, the words barely audible. "I want what is mine," I said. I closed the folder in front of me. The crisp sound echoed in the quiet room. "I want my investment returned. You have Mr. Langley's letter. It contains the terms. I expect to hear from your lawyer with a proposed payment schedule within the week." I stood up. The meeting was over. I had not raised my voice. I had not shed a tear. I had simply presented a series of facts, and the conclusion was inescapable. I looked down at the man who was once my son. I felt no hatred, no anger, not even satisfaction. All I felt was a profound, cold, and final disappointment. It was the feeling of walking through a beautiful house you once loved, only to realize it's completely empty. "Goodbye, David," I said. Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him alone with my lawyer and the bill for his soul. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The lawyers handled everything after that. There were no more dramatic confrontations. It all dissolved into the dry, emotionless language of legal correspondence. David's attorney sent a proposal. Mr. Langley sent a counter-proposal. A week later, a final agreement was signed. There was no lawsuit. There was no public scandal. There was just a quiet, legally binding repayment plan. Every month, on the first of the month, a sum of money is transferred from his account to mine. It's not a gift. It's not an allowance. It's a debt repayment. It is the sterile, monthly reminder of the contract he breached. We have no other contact. Our relationship now exists only as a transaction number on a bank statement. It's the clean, cold ending he deserves. The first payment arrived, and I looked at the number on my bank's website. It felt abstract. It was a number, but it had no joy in it. It was restitution, not a reward. I knew then that the money itself was never the point. It was just a tool I had used to dismantle a prison. Now that I was free, I had to decide what to do with my freedom. For a few weeks, I did nothing. I rested. I felt the deep, bone-weary exhaustion of a 20-year battle finally coming to an end. The large oak sign for Agnes's Good Things still leaned against my living room wall. It was a silent accusation, a reminder of a life I had packed away in an attic. One morning, I stood in my perfectly adequate, perfectly boring kitchen, and I knew what I had to do with the first installment of my repaid investment. It wasn't about saving it. It was about reinvesting it, this time in myself. I didn't buy stocks or bonds. I bought a new oven, a beautiful steel convection oven with a steam injection function, the kind I used to dream about when I was wiping down my old temperamental machine at the bakery. I bought a heavy-duty stand mixer, the kind that could handle a triple batch of brioche dough without shaking. I bought sheets of thick, commercial-grade baking steel, marble slabs for pastry, and a set of German knives that felt perfectly balanced in my hand. I used his money to turn my kitchen into my sanctuary, my workshop, my laboratory. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't just a mother. I was a baker again. At first, I just baked for myself. I rediscovered the old rhythms, the pre-dawn quiet, the precise chemistry of yeast and warmth, the singular focus of shaping a loaf or laminating dough for croissants. My hands, which had grown soft and idle, remembered everything. The muscle memory was deep in them. With every loaf I pulled from the oven, with every perfectly flaky pastry I created, I felt a piece of myself coming back into focus. My house began to smell of caramelizing sugar, of browning butter, of yeast and cinnamon. It was the smell of my own resurrection. I was giving away most of what I baked to neighbors, just to get it out of the house. One of them, a young woman who owned a small coffee shop a few blocks away, stopped me in the hallway one afternoon. "Agnes," she said, "that lemon tart you gave me yesterday, it was the best thing I've ever eaten. My customers would go crazy for your stuff. Have you ever thought about selling it?" A door opened. A small one, but it was a door. We struck a simple deal. I would bake a few things for her a couple of times a week. No pressure, no contracts. Just a partnership based on a shared appreciation for good, honest work. My first delivery was a dozen scones and 2 rustic apple tarts. They were gone in an hour. Soon, my baking became the quiet centerpiece of my days. I wasn't running a full-scale bakery. I had no interest in that kind of stress anymore. I was an artisan. I worked at my own pace. I baked what I loved. The coffee shop, the daily grind, became my new partner. The owner, A young woman named Sarah valued me for what I could create with my hands, not for who my son was. She didn't care that I was Dr. Miller's mother. She cared that I was Agnes, the woman who makes the incredible croissants. My life is small now, and it is peaceful. I am not rich. The monthly payments from David cover my bills and my baking supplies. I am not famous. My reputation exists only in a small neighborhood, among people who have come to appreciate the simple joy of a well-made pastry, but I am happy, a deep, quiet, earned happiness. I have found a profound peace in the rhythm of my work. I have realized that my true value was never in the success of the man I raised. It was always here, in my own two hands. He was my most ambitious project, and he failed. But my craft never betrayed me. It was waiting for me, patiently, in the attic. Sometimes, when I am pulling a tray of golden brown loaves from my beautiful new oven, and the kitchen is filled with the warm, life-affirming smell of fresh bread, I think about what I've learned. My son told me I was a burden. He was wrong. A burden is something you are forced to carry. What I am is a baker, a creator, a founder, and I am carrying nothing but the satisfying weight of my own life's work. I have no need for a legacy in a prestigious medical journal. My legacy is here, in the recipes I know by heart, in the smiles of the strangers who enjoy my work, and in the simple, profound truth that I have finally, after all these years, come home to myself. The months turned into a year, and then two. The rhythm of my new life became as familiar and comforting as the feeling of rising dough. My days are marked by the scent of baking bread, the warm hum of my oven, and the easy, respectful partnership I have with Sarah at the coffee shop. The monthly payments from David arrive in my bank account with the sterile precision of a Swiss train. I no longer check to see if they've come. They are simply a fact, like the sunrise. They are the salary I pay myself from a business I closed long ago. His world and mine no longer intersect. I hear things, of course. My neighbors sometimes mention seeing his name in the society pages, a benefactor at some charity gala. I see his face on a billboard for the hospital's new cardiology wing. He looks successful. He looks important. And he looks like a complete stranger. The emotional cord was severed so cleanly that I feel no pride, no resentment, no connection at all. I simply see a man I used to know. I have found that true peace is not about forgetting. It's about remembering without pain. It's about looking at a scar and no longer feeling the wound. The money he sends me is one such scar. For a long time, I used it for practical things, my equipment, my ingredients, my bills. It was a tool, a resource, but it still felt tied to him, a transaction born of bitterness. The final healing came in a quiet, unexpected way. One rainy Tuesday, I was sitting in Sarah's coffee shop, sipping a cappuccino and reading the local paper. And there it was. A small article about an upcoming charity auction to raise funds for the pediatric wing of David's hospital. They were raising money for a new neonatal incubator, a machine to help the smallest, most fragile babies survive. I read the article, and I looked at the picture of the smiling, handsome doctor who was chairing the event, my son, and I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness. Just a quiet, neutral observation. That evening, I sat at my small desk in the living room. The bakery sign, Agnes's Good Things, was now properly mounted on the wall above it. It's the first thing I see in the morning and the last thing I see at night. I opened my checkbook. I thought about the money in my bank account, his money, my money. It was all so tangled. and I realized it was time for one final transaction. I wrote a check, not for a huge amount, just a small, respectable sum. In the memo line, I wrote, "For the Neonatal Incubator Fund." I made it out to the hospital's foundation. And in the space for the name, the signature line, I did not write Agnes Miller. I simply wrote, "In memory of a baker's hands." I sealed it in a plain, white envelope. No return address. The next morning, I dropped it into a public mailbox on my way to deliver my scones to the coffee shop. As it slid from my fingers and disappeared into the darkness, I felt the last, invisible thread connecting me to him finally snap. He will never know where that donation came from. He will see the anonymous contribution on a financial report and think nothing of it. The money I earned through my sacrifice, which he tried to deny me, will now be used to help save lives in his own hospital, and he will never be able to claim credit for it. It was no longer his money. It was no longer my pain. It had been transformed, laundered through an act of quiet grace, and turned into something purely good. I have closed the ledger. All accounts are settled. The debt has been repaid, not just financially, but spiritually. He once told me I was a burden. Perhaps he was right. But he forgot that architects, the ones who design and build things from the ground up, understand the true load-bearing capacity of every single stone in a foundation. I was a cornerstone of the magnificent building of his life, and when he decided that stone was a flaw, I simply removed it. I took my stone back. His building may still be standing, tall and impressive for all the world to see, but it is standing on a hollow space. And I have taken my stone, and I have used it to build a small, warm, fragrant kitchen of my own.